in the middle of a series called Bad Religion. If you haven't been here for the first few, I'm sorry. And if you have been here for the first few, I'm sorry. No, and all that, we are trying to sort out for us as a church how to navigate what has become a much more difficult climate culturally to navigate church. And with that, we invite you into the conversation. If you're new with us, at the end of the message, there's a chance to ask questions. If you want to ask questions during the message, if you interrupt me, I probably will respond. But there's also what we call a text line, and you're free to text that at any time. I get texts throughout the week on that. And so we do our best to respond. We're calling it Q&R. Question and response, because usually the questions are well worth asking and the responses sometimes are not so good. But we are trying. And so this morning we're going to pivot a little bit with this series, and we're going to be in James chapter 1. James chapter 1 is a perspective on religion that is a little different than what we've been looking at. And it actually is a verse that helps us understand actually what is pure and blameless religion. But before we get there, I want to just give you a few questions to ponder as we enter into this morning's message. And the first few questions, actually, I'll try my best not to make this rapid fire. But I think the first question that I had to wrestle with when I was younger was this: what if the whole idea behind religion was different than what I thought it was? What if it wasn't to make God happy with me? What if the reason that I went to church wasn't so that God wouldn't squash me during the week? I grew up in a very, I will say, legalistic environment around that idea. And so there's some of this I had to unpack as I got older. But what if religion actually is a means by which we can bring a little bit of heaven to earth? What if I realized that how I practice my faith could change other people's lives? I think that's a good question to ask. And if I change the way I look at it, would it change the way I approach it? Would I do different things? Would I act a different way? So what if the difference between bad religion and pure religion is not actually in what you do, but actually in why you are doing it? If you are here, you're probably practicing some kind of religion. Unless you're new and you're kind of going, okay, well, let's go see what this is about. We invite you into this. But in some reason, you're here. And so you're practicing some form, some kind of faith practice just by sitting here. And with that comes routines that reflect that religion. So maybe you wake up early and you pray. Maybe you wake up early and you read your Bible. Maybe you wake up early and watch Good Morning America. Maybe you are a person who shows up 3 Sundays out of the month, and you give your time and you give your money, and you're trying to be aware of your faults and your shortcomings, and you're trying to change some things about yourself, and you're trying, and you're really trying, and you're working at it, and you're trying to be around people that are a positive influence in your life, and the idea that I may have done something wrong weighs on me, or I may have sinned, and there's a weight that comes with that, and I'm trying not to be that way, and I'm trying, and I'm trying. You may even share your faith with other people. You may limit your vices to just a few indulgences, or not, but you're trying. You may volunteer to help with marginalized people. You may even volunteer to work with teenagers and kids, or even the elderly. You may have come to a place where you can control your temper most of the time. And you try really hard not to shame people. And your religion is a series of things that you're trying to do. And you're trying. What if all of these practices that I just listed were actually for nothing? When I was in college, I was part of a campus ministry. I have fond memories of my friends in that ministry. So how do I navigate this conversation without being judgmental? That's where I was at last night when I was laying in bed. How do I invite you into a little bit of my story without the you will hear a little bit of contempt in me. And I apologize for that, because I don't want it to be because they shaped my life in many ways. But we had many practices as a campus ministry. And those practices included scripture memory, sharing our faith, doing small group Bible studies. And we were, I'm going to use the word militant about it. And we sat in judgment of the other campus ministries because they weren't as diligent. They weren't as militant. And not only did we sit in judgment of the other campus ministries, we sat in contempt and judgment of the church because they didn't know how to make disciples. I look back on those days with great regret. I look back on those days and wish I could have some of them over again. And then there's moments when, like, verses that I memorized when I was 19 years old will pop into my mind at just the right time. And I go, there's value in that. There was something I learned in that. And probably the thing that has set me up later in life for the way that I now involve myself with ministry was a response to that. For some reason, that ministry thought that one size fit all, that we just put people through the machine. We just put them through the things that we know work for me, and it'll work for them. My friends, that is a fallacy, and it's not true. That reduces a relationship with God. Anything that reduces a relationship with God to a formula misses the point. Can it be helpful? Sure. Can it be damaging? Absolutely. Can it be done for the right reasons? Yes. Can it be done for the wrong reasons? Oh, for sure. I've done all of that. It worked for me, so it should work for you. It's one of the most insidious, underneath lies of bad religion. I want to invite you into something different. I want to invite you into a conversation around what it is to step into a relationship with a grace giver. I want to invite you into a relationship that more revolves around your heart than it does around your methods. I want you to meet Jesus. And he wants to meet you where you're at. I thought that my religious routines would build for me a greater relationship with God, when in reality it created a distance between me and God. I thought that I could work my way into God's good graces. I was trying to attain something I already had. I was trying to do something so that God would give me what he's already given me. There's futility in trying to extract something from God that he freely gives you. And it leaves you hollow. It kind of leaves you in a place where you go, why am I doing that? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with God? And then I realized at some point along the line, I'm doing this so that my peers like me. I'm doing this so that my friends will be my friends. I'm doing this for the entertainment of others, that they can hear the Here are the verses that I've memorized from these little cards in a packet in my pocket. I'm giving away who I was a part of. And so as I got older and I got more distance from that. I had to repent of some things that I had done. I had to change. I had to realize some things inside of me were motivated in the wrong direction. A lot of the stuff that I did because I wanted people to see me. I wanted God to love me. And my motive was, if I could just get to that place where I see these other people at, maybe I'll really know God. And it makes me sad that I miss God in the midst of all of that. And we can be very religious people and miss God altogether. So this morning, I want to just invite you into a heart check. I believe religion is a heart check. Let's together examine our hearts and ask some healthy questions and ask the question, I think, deep down, why do I do what I do? And you and I'm the only one that really knows why I do what I do. And you are the only ones that know what you really do and why you do it. Don't let someone else tell you your motive. You know your motive. So let's do this together. What is the condition of our hearts? What's the condition of my heart? And we're going to start in Matthew chapter 12, verses 33 through 35. And Jesus puts it this way. He says, a tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. You brood of snakes, how could evil men like you speak what is good and right? For whatever is in your heart determines what you will say. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. This is the idea of what I've described over my life as the overflow of the heart. We live out of that. And what comes out of our heart is consistently presented in the way that we live. It's how we treat people. It's how we talk. It's how we engage with God. It is the overflow of our hearts. And sure, we can fake it and we can do things that are different from the actual overflow of our hearts, but the contempt comes with it. It is the evidence of our religion. In James, we get this description, and this is from the New Living Translation. He says, James 1, 26, 27, it says this. If anyone thinks himself to be religious, yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this person's religion is worthless. Verse 27, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. You've probably heard that verse before. And in context, it helps us to understand what actually God is expecting from us. But it also gives us a clue as to why we do what we do. And just a point of clarification, in this verse, he uses orphans and widows for a reason. In that culture, in that time, orphans and widows were the most marginalized throwaways in the society. They were the ones most likely to be sold into slavery. They were the ones that were in most need. And in a culture that kind of pushed the marginalized away, what he's saying is, and there's another, I want to give you another translation of this so you can kind of hear it in a different way. in the NIV, he says this: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this is to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And then in the more expansive, amplified version of the Bible, it says, pure and unblemished religion, as it is expressed in our outward acts, is the sight of our God and Father, who is this: to visit and look after the fatherless and the widows in their distress, and to keep oneself uncontaminated by the secular world. There's two components to it, and I want you to see both of them, but oftentimes we focus on that first one. It's to visit them. It's to be present with them. It is to not just recognize they exist, not just give them money, but to see their humanity, those that have been marginalized. It is not enough in us to merely to be people who recognize that the homeless thing exists. It isn't enough in us just to acknowledge those things. It is to identify with those who are on the margins. And yeah, we can't fix all that, but we can give them their humanity. There's something about that that is godlike. To visit somebody on the margins and to bring heaven with us, to bring God with us, to bring Jesus with us, is to elevate their humanity. In this culture, it was for the widow and the orphan were the example of the category of people that were the most marginalized. And to see them, to acknowledge them, to elevate their humanity was to be godlike. And so it goes beyond just helping. It moves into elevating. It moves into everyone is welcome at the table. In that culture, at that time, the widow and the orphan would not be welcome at the table. And so, here's where this idea gets really tricky, is that we talk about it, we can look at it, we can engage it, and we can do it. We can go and see and minister in the midst of that. And we have partners that do that great. We just talking to Ty. They do that down in Honduras and they do it in Uganda. We have room at the inn. We have one gen away. If you come tonight, we'll lay that all out. And with the idea of that, we would enter into this. Not just give money to it. We want people that will partner with us so that we can go and be a part of it. But here's the flaw. The flaw for me is I do that either out of obligation. I do that because I want God to see me. I want to practice good religion. I want to do those things for the sake of me and being seen. I want to do that for the sake of being seen by God. I want to do that for the sake of being seen by others. And so what I glean from it then is not pure religion. It's actually bad religion. The struggle is to respond to what God has already done for us. The struggle is that you're in the relationship with God in such a way that Jesus is present. And in his presence, we aren't obligated. We are responding to what God has done for us. He's adopted us. He met us in our place of need. He met us in a place where we were low. He met us in that place. He pursued us and looked for us and went after us and captured us and captivated our hearts. And he moved us in a way that's such that just overflows from our heart. And as it overflows from our heart, we can't help but see. We can't help but see the marginalized. We're actually suppressing good religion when we do it because we feel obligated. This is tricky. There's a fine line. No one knows the motive by which we do what we do. And so I want to invite you into a different idea, a different place, a different kind of religion. See, when religion is expressed in the proper way, it reflects Jesus. What people actually experience is not you, it's Jesus. And I want you to see that this verse actually isn't a command. I'll read it one more time. Verse 27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, is to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless. Look after. It sounds like a command, but the command isn't in the original language. It isn't to say, go and do this. What he's saying is be this. Be this. Be the church. Be these people. And it becomes second nature rather than a command to do something that feels like religion. And when we do that, we are really bringing heaven to earth. I wish I was better at this. This is the ongoing struggle of being in a world that is very much so self-centered. Very much so look after yourself first. It is a me first culture. And so to allow the heart to overflow into arenas that depreciate my value is really hard. And the reality is that even saying that out loud, I realize that when I say depreciate my value, it's not really what I'm doing. It's actually elevating the value of God. One of the purest and most undefiled demonstrations of the gospel is to care for and move towards orphans and widows. I have a personality that leans itself towards scarcity. If you've met Mike and I have a very similar, and if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 5 on the Enneagram, and I measure everything in my mind of how much energy it's going to take from me, how much of my resources, and do I have enough? And I have a tendency to hoard my time, and I have a tendency to hoard my energy. I wish I was better at it. But if I see something that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of energy, I weigh it in my mind, is it worth it? Not all of you live this way. I live this way. This is my struggle. And as I struggle with it, I have to ask the question over and over again, am I overplaying my scarcity? And you know what? 9 times out of 10, I am. But that's a discipline I've had to learn about myself. And I also have a tendency to see God's capacity in scarcity as well. So I don't see the abundance of God well. I don't see his never-ending 10,000 cattle. I see more like 5. There's not enough hills and grass, because if there were 10,000, there would be a problem. I see life through the lens of how do I manage the resources around me, which makes it really hard to stop and go, this is where I need to enter in. So I join you there. I don't know what there's other extremes of this. Oh, we got everything. There's no scarcity. And those people scare me. And so with this verse is not a prescriptive verse. It's a descriptive verse. It's what pure religion looks like. And so I want to just invite you to ask the question, why? Why do I enter into this? Why don't I? I have to ask both of those questions. So we kind of know what bad religion looks like. It's power over, it's entitlement, it's selfishness. And so what does pure religion actually look like? It does something I know that it has something to do with my attunement with God, how connected I am to God. And if what I'm doing in my religious activity isn't attuning me to God, then it's not. There's a lot of things I do in life that don't tune me to God. But I see it in the overflow of my heart. When I see the contempt I have for other people, when I see the contempt, I know that I'm sitting in a place that's not healthy and not right. I wish I was better at that as well. But Paul gives us an example of living out of his heart. It's found in Philippians 4. And he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And for me, this is amazing because I love to think about things. Whatever you have learned or received, this is Paul now, he says, whatever have you learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. It's not enough to think about it. It's something we put into practice. It's something we do. And there's an overflow that comes. I find myself, when I dwell on the opposite of what is true or noble, what is false or what is wrong or what is corrupted or what is ignoble, what is not right, whatever is impure, when I dwell on those things, what overflows out of my heart is a whole lot of crap. Because I've allowed the world around me to pollute, stain my heart. And it's not living in denial. See, I had somebody ask me the other day, says, so how do we practice heaven in a world full of hell and not live in denial? You'd have to, I don't know how you live in denial in this world. I can't get there. See, I live more in the reality of the fact that this is a really hard place to live, and live in such a way that I bring heaven to it. It's not that you deny it. It's that you see it. You recognize it for what it is, a part of the world system around us that marginalizes and dehumanizes people. And what we bring with us when we enter into that world is to restore humans to their proper place. We give them dignity. We give them what God intended. They're seen and they're embraced. That's pure religion. What we internalize matters. There's something about doing the right thing that matters. Now, it's going to sound like in just a second that I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. And I apologize for that. I don't know how else to do this. But sometimes we just need to do the right thing, whether we want to or not. Because I think the practices that we do shape our heart. If I go through my life, now listen just for a second, if I go through my life continually treating people like I think they deserve to be treated, i.e. I treat nice people nicely and I treat not so nice people not nicely. I measure out my judgment towards each person according to how they treat me. I am now sitting in the seat of judge, and I only bring heaven to the people that I think deserve it. Right? It's pretty much how we live. It's pretty much how I live. I shouldn't say we. There are exceptions to every rule. I know some people that bring hell to nice people. Unfortunately. And I mean that as nicely as I can. But there are also people in the world that bring heaven to hellish people, mean people, difficult people. See, I want to be that person. And so we enter into this not with the idea of, I've got to do it right. We enter into this knowing that in my place of disdain, my place of pollution, my place of being hell on earth. I was approached by Jesus with grace. I was approached by Jesus with forgiveness. I was approached by Jesus with the understanding that, you know what, I love you the way you are. And my natural response to that is, come on, no one has loved me that way. I don't even think my mom has loved me that way. But that's the thing that changes the motivation of the heart, is the reception of that kind of grace. It's the receiving of that allows us to go, oh, I've got a lot to give away. Not because of my own ability to conjure it up, but because I've received so much from God. It's the idea, and I realized that I had to be forgiven a lot. So therefore, my contempt for somebody who has to be forgiven a lot has a lot more width and depth. Because I understand in my heart the amount that Jesus had to go through to rescue me. But if you don't experience that, it's really hard. It's why here at Journey we're trying to practice mutuality. It's one of our highest values. And it's not predicated on anything other than being human. It's not what you contribute to the whole. It's that you are in the whole. You are part of the being of the whole. And therefore you bring value, intrinsic value, because you are merely a human. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. It's not merely a human. You are human. And humans aren't merely anything. They are the image bearers of the ones who made us. They looked at each other, the three of them, and said, we will make them in our image. It's enough sometimes just to look inside and go, I was made in the image of God, and it bolsters me. Sometimes I have to look at other people and say they were made in the image of God, and it changes the way I see them. I forget a lot. Like, I forget at times that people driving cars are image bearers. I forget that the guys that work on the railroad are image bearers. I forget sometimes that the people who come into our parking lot and take all the parking spots on a weekday and aren't supposed to park in certain spots are image bearers. And I feel the contempt in me. I do. I feel it. And I recognize it. And there are days when what the overflow in my heart is not anything but heaven. Anything but heaven. And those of you who work with me know that probably more than anybody else. Kevin or Kevin, that's right. And I have nights when I go home and I go, man, I got to find that person and apologize. But practicing heaven shapes my heart. I've never walked away, and I can honestly say I've never walked away from a situation where I practiced heaven when I didn't want to, where I thought, I should have unleashed hell. So, one more verse, and then I'm going to take questions, because you're probably going, how does this work itself out? I really want to help with that. But practicing the principle of looking out for the interests of others shapes our hearts in such a way that it reveals God's. Listen to Paul. He says, therefore, this is in Philippians chapter 2, if you have any encouragement, now these words are really, really powerful, from being united with Jesus. If any comfort from Jesus' love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, Then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one of mind. Do nothing, this is the part, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. You want to know what pure religion is? It's right there. It's right there. And you can hear this through the lens of two ways. And this is the way I heard it when I memorized these verses when I was in college, and I know them well. And I always heard it through the lens of self-depreciation. I always heard it through the lens of make sure that people know that you are less than them. That's not what this verse says. If you have a minimalist view of yourself, you're going to have a minimalist view of others. If you have, and I'm going to use this word, I get teased about it, but if you have a robust understanding of who you are in Christ, you're going to have a robust understanding of who the humans are around you. To understand your relationship with Jesus is to understand that in your current condition, you are deeply and purposefully and enormously loved. Just the way you are. He just invites you into a life that is so much more than what you got. And I'd love to tell you that if you do all the right things, he will bless you. It doesn't work that way. We do the right things because we're already blessed. We do the right things because it is an overflow of our hearts for what Jesus has already done for us. You are a child of God. You are a person who's been adopted into a family that's much bigger than the one you got. You are blessed. And all Jesus is saying is, give it away. Because there's a never-ending resource of it. So with that, and maybe there's no questions, but I can't tell. The group seems very settled. Hey, Sam. So, any questions? Oh, we have one over here.
Thanks. I think a lot of us are probably pretty familiar with the sense of distance from God and going through the motions, trying to capture that feeling. Could you describe a little bit about what that feeling is and how we know when we get there, when we're getting closeness with God instead of that distance?
That is a great question. And I think it also has to do with how we experience closeness with people. I think there is, it is different for, I would argue, everybody. For me, that closeness is rooted in a place where I am not even aware of the overflow of my heart being heaven. There is a degree of, I'm much more aware when I'm separate than when I'm close. And my orientation is away. I'm aware. And I think for me, those clear emotions, feelings that bubble up in me are loneliness. I don't feel seen by God when I intellectually know I am seen by God. And when anger becomes directed in ways that it should not. So I know when I'm distant, when I'm close, I believe, yeah. So.
Over here. All right, be prepared.
I'm prepared.
Love the transparency of our staff here.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up with that. I don't think most of us did, hearing from pastors or people who speak up front as far as the transparency.
Mm-hmm.
How do you practice that in your own life as far as you shared about understanding exactly being real, but also being connected?
Yeah.
with God. How do you transfer that to be able to understand some of the things that you shared as far as your vulnerabilities and the things that trigger you and your understanding of how to be a healthy individual, and then also that understanding of this is where I believe God wants me to be too.
Wow, Dave.
Told you that was going to be.
Yeah, buckle up, right? There's, for me, and again, I can only answer this from the perspective of me because personality has something to do with it. My history has something to do with it. My experience with church has actually a lot to do with it. And so my journey has brought me to a place where I lean into what used to be uncomfortable for me. And I lean into it in such a way as that I don't have many secrets anymore. I actually have very few, because I think being authentic allows people to see that we're all in the same journey together. And being authentic and being, I think authentic moves beyond transparent. Transparent is you can see through me. Authentic is this is my real self. And so my real self is sitting in this place where it's scary to be authentic because you can reject me. You can reject the real me. Whereas before there was a persona that you could reject and it didn't bother me. Now, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table, and you can reject me. And when I got comfortable with that idea, it actually moved me closer to Jesus because I began to understand that he accepts my authentic self. Does that help? Okay.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, bud.
I feel like the theme of this question can come up a lot in the Journey community, and it has to do with what you were talking about with like your college experience, and you used that word militant, and you talked about there could be this one-size-fits-all approach, and because was true for me in my experience, it needs to be that for everyone else. So
right. Yep.
I'm wondering if you have feedback on how to kind of just like self-reflect or self-evaluate. Cause sometimes I worry if the pendulum can swing and I can still adopt that one-size-fits-all or that same kind of militant attitude, but only the cause or the belief has changed. And so now it's like, I really appreciate, I think just an overall like attitude and posture that Journey has, but sometimes I wonder if I can just still take the same method, but the belief is different. And now I'm still thinking, oh, people need to, and it's an attitude of correction and teaching others rather than just true freedom. So any feedback on that?
That's a great question. I think it's anything that you do that works has a tendency to be cemented in such a way that it becomes a routine and or gospel. It's part of the struggle. And so what we think it works for me should work for everybody else is very common. And it's how we go through life. This is, this budget worked for me, so it should work for you. This worked for me, this should work for you. I found that principle not to work very well at all across the board because of how people approach things. So for me, it is boiled down to this idea that I want people of different thoughts, different beliefs, different backgrounds to come together and get to know each other and see how they survived, how they got to this place, how they've received grace from God, how they've received from God in a totally different way than I have, and see how that all works together in such a way that it builds a community that is totally different than what I ever anticipated. If you would have told me when I was in my 20s and pastoring in my 20s that I would be a part of a church that's like this, in my 20s, I would have said, no, that's not how I would have said it. But as I've gotten older and I'm beginning to see how all of this comes together around a person named Jesus, I've moved off of that. I've moved off of you have to do it like me. I don't care if you do it like me. I just want you to know him. And he will draw you. He will work on your heart. He will move this. I'm happy to shepherd. I'm happy to point. I'm happy to move people in the right direction. I'm even happy to point out when they're not. But there's a degree of you've got to now move in a direction or at least be oriented towards the one who can actually change that. And so I've kind of stopped giving any kind of you ought to do this, you ought to do this, you ought to, and moved more towards asking questions. Curiosity has helped me a lot. One more.
Right back here, Kev.
So I completely agree with the statement you said as far as we are already blessed, so therefore blessed. And it's a posture that I've tried to take my entire life, grace and mercy and give and give and give. And one of the verses that I've always struggled with, and I'd like your opinion on, is in Matthew 7:6, where after Jesus talks about judging others, then at the very end he goes, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So in your experience, if you don't mind sharing, how have you been able to identify, to quote the Bible, dealing with dogs and pigs and not exhausting yourself to the point where it's like 2 more ounces of grace or 4 more ounces of mercy and I'm going to get there, but in reality.
Yeah, it's really hard. I have taken the posture for better or for worse. And I don't know who the dogs and the pigs are. I've taken this posture. And for better or for worse, I'm not telling anybody in this room to take this posture. And I will be taken advantage of. And I will sometimes be on the gullible side of being taken advantage of. Rather than dehumanize somebody. I just would rather be on that side. And to call them dogs and pigs, I give Jesus the liberty to call them whatever he wants because he knows. But I'd rather love a few dogs and pigs along the way. Give them some humanity and some taste of heaven than to withhold something that ultimately from somebody who needs it, but I don't know the difference. I wish I was better at that. I wish, that's my only answer to that. And I don't think it's probably a good answer from the way you're looking at me, but I apologize. With that, I invite you this morning to take communion. I'm going to ask the band to come up. I'm not pretending that what we just talked about is easy. I just want to invite you into a rich relationship with Jesus that is reflected in the way that your heart overflows into the lives of others, because I think that's the most valuable thing on this planet as humans, and how we treat them matters to God. And so you're invited. And the beauty of this is every week we get to be reminded of how God treated us. As we take communion, just be reminded that the gift that you got, that we have, is that a God pursued us, he chased us down, he died on a cross, and he wants to remind us of that over and over again because we forget. I'll forget. I always forget. Because I want humans to be better and treat me right and do the right thing. And what I've learned is they don't. I don't. And yet I'm deeply loved. And the cross reminds me. Communion reminds me. So as you come and you take communion this morning, all I want you to remember is that you're deeply loved. And that well of love is not scarce. It's meant to be freely given.